group that a few of you are in. The ELCA, our church family, put out a 6-week series called Civic Life and Faith, and so I started that last night on Zoom. If anybody wants to join us, that's fine if you missed the first session, and be 5 more Wednesdays on Zoom, and you can find that information, the Google form, on our website, nampatrinity.org. The other thing you'll see on our website that I think is quite related to this is that volunteer registration is open for Learning Peace, a camp for kids, which a lot of you know about. Some of you have volunteered with before. This, I call it spiritual but not religious day camp for about 100 kids in our community that's about conflict resolution, mindfulness, connecting with nature, and media literacy. So that's the last week of June. And finally, a group here at Trinity, one of our ministry initiatives for this year is to put together an event called something about, we don't have a title yet, Tough Conversations. How do we have tough conversations? So we think we're going to have like a 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. event with a free lunch in October and a panel, and we just have a lot of energy around it, and so watch for that information. We are videoing this and live streaming, so if Sarah's going to be careful, it's mostly going to be about Mark, but you might be on video. So I've followed Mark's work for quite a while. I was just telling him that when I was getting ready to go on sabbatical, one of my Methodist friends from Washington, D.C. was like, you need to talk to these people who were trained at the Hearth. And those people led a workshop in 2019. The same summer, Susan Rowe led a workshop on memoir here at Trinity. And then California Lutheran University and PLTS, 2 of our Lutheran institutions, got a huge Lilly grant right before they got it a bit before the pandemic, and I saw it, and I was intrigued. And then Desta Gaynor from Cal Lutheran came to our fall theological conference, and she said, yeah, we're going to work with this guy named Mark Yaconelli. And I said, how do I sign up? So the last thing I did before the pandemic was I got trained by you in Malibu in February 2020, and we thought we were so innovative because we were going to lead groups on Zoom. And then everybody was leading everything on Zoom. So anyway, that was such a funny thing. I've led 3 groups in our synod in those spiritual practices, and it's just been such a gift, so thank you for that. So Mark is a speaker, community builder, and author of Between the Listening and the Telling, How Stories Can Save Us, as well as 5 previous books, and I will say that Julie Ward is selling the books. I've always wanted to say this. Thanks to Rediscovered Books, the best independent bookstore in the West. Because we're selling them and they're not here selling them, we get 20% of the proceeds, so thank you. And but Mark brought a newer book, The Gift of Hard Things, which sounds very good also. So those are for sale. As a founder and director of the Hearth nonprofit, Mark or Yaconelli? Yaconelli. Has worked with the Ford Family Foundation, Compassion International, the Greenbelt Arts Festival, the Eli Lilly Foundation, the Mexican American Center of Austin, among other organizations. Yaconelli holds an MA in spirituality from the Graduate Theological Union and received a spiritual direction diploma from San Francisco Theological Seminary, where I got my DMin. Interviews and profiles of Mark's work have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, BBC Radio, and ABC World News Tonight. He and his wife have 3 grown children and live in Ashland, Oregon. Please help me in welcoming.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Megan, I'm going to ask you if you could bring me a glass of water, too, when you get a chance to. Thanks. Well, thank you for coming out on a Thursday night. This is Thursday night. We've been on the road since last August, leading events, and we've been in reform schools and universities and colleges. I've been in a lot of bars, sometimes leading events, where we led storytelling events in kind of public spaces, and everybody's hurting is what it feels like to me. You know, I've been in communities of color and Native American churches and inner city groups and reform schools, and it just feels like we're all blurry. If I took a photograph, we're all a little bit fuzzy, and we don't really know ourselves right now in this time, which makes a ton of sense because we're moving at the speed of loneliness in this culture, and the devices that we use to connect with each other are hurting us, particularly our young people. Suicide rates are devastating right now among young adults. For the first time in recorded history in the United States, and more young people are reporting, a higher percentage of young people report feeling lonely than people over 65. There's a new book called Hangout that we've kind of lost those public spaces where people just spend time together. So it's a really, really difficult time that we're all in, all generations are in right now. And this practice and this work of sharing stories, which is really about sharing human experience, is a practice that all of us can do, that's accessible to everybody. We all have brains wired for story. And what's been most pleasurable on this tour is when I'm among young people. At universities, it's really tricky because most of those students are there against their will. Their professors have required them to come hear me. So I'll have 150 university students, and they're all on their phones, or they're all like trying to take a nap, and they just don't want to be there. And it's a particular challenge because if I can get them to start getting in small groups and get the phones aside and telling stories from their own lives, more and more energy comes in the room, more emotion comes in the room, and pretty soon they're going like, we don't ever talk to each other like this. Like, no one ever talks to us like this. We never get to talk about our lives. And there's a kind of an awakening that happens. And it's beautiful just to see. And you feel possibility, you feel hope, and you feel that human connection that we all need in order for our own well-being and for the well-being of our communities and the planet. So, when you're young, if you're lucky, people tell you stories, right? If you're lucky, if you have that babysitter who at bedtime comes in and maybe they make up a story, right? And all of a sudden, you and the 16-year-old junior who lives down the street, who your parents have hired, is telling you this story, and suddenly you and she have traveled through space and time, and the two of you are in the walls of an old house, and you're there with the little mouse family and their little mouse furniture and the cats prowling outside. And you feel that kind of sense of wonder, right? Because just the two of you have made this world just in your imagination. You can feel that even though she's creating this story, it's happening real in live time. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. And the two of you are in that imaginary world that story brings us into. Or if you have that grandmother who's telling you, now when I was a kid, we each had our own horse, and we had to take care of it and raise it. And then when we'd go to school, you had to ride the horse, and you can feel yourself imagining your grandmother, right, as a young woman riding this horse through the snowstorm to get to class. And it's in your imagination now, the two of you are in that space, riding that horse through space and time. Or you have that teacher, and the teacher says, now if everyone will help me clean the classroom here, I'll read 2 chapters from the book. And you're like, 2 chapters? Yes. And then you all look at Troy like, Troy, don't screw this up. And then everybody cleans up the room, and then you all go and sit on the floor, and the teacher brings out the book, and she's reading the book, and everybody's quiet because you're all kind of in that space between here and wherever, and you can feel yourselves, leaving your bodies, leaving time and space, and then all of a sudden, all 25 of you, and the teacher as well, you're in the wardrobe, right, in some old house in the north of England, and you feel the jackets pressing against you, and just in the periphery, you can feel that light glancing off the snow, and all of you are going to move out together, right? There's an intimacy between the teller and the listeners, that you feel. It's a relational kind of magic that shows up. So when my daughter was 3 years old, she refused to wear clothes. And it didn't matter what we bought. We tried all kinds of things, right? And there was too slippery, or it was too tight, or it was bumpy, or I don't like it, it's on my neck, weird. And then whoosh, all the clothes would go off, right? We live in southern Oregon, along the California-Oregon border, up in the mountains there, and it gets cold, and it gets dark, and we were basically homebound. We couldn't leave our home, because if we left and went outside with this naked child, someone would call Child Protection Services, right? So we just stayed inside. And winter came, and December passed, and January, where it's really dark and really cold, and we're going stir crazy. And one night, my wife says to me, we are going out for pizza. I'm getting the boys dressed. I'm going out into the van. You need to get Gracie dressed and meet us there, right? So, Gracie hears my wife Jill say this, and she's kind of standing like this outside of her room, like, I wonder how this is going to go, And so I go and I kind of approach her cautiously, a little bit afraid, and I get the little velvet pants and the little velvet shirt that she would sometimes leave on, and I put these on her. It's like, hey, we're going out for pizza. It's going to be really fun, and there's just little games. Clothes go off. It's too loose. It was too loose. It was too loose. And as soon as she yells that, I go over to the window in her room. I'm like, Grace, you can't yell too loose. Why? I said, well, come over here. Over where? Just come over here to the window. Look. You see up there? You see above the houses where all the trees are up there? Yeah. Well, that's the fawn village. And in the fawn village, the youngest fawn is named Too Loose. And when you yell, too loose, he can hear you, and he'll start coming down into our town. But I want him to come down. No, we don't want him to come down. We don't want him to come down because you know how people are. They'll snatch him up, and they'll want to keep him inside their house to have their own little fawn. So he can't come down here, so you can't yell these. As I'm telling this, I'm putting on the pants, I'm putting on the shirts, I'm picking her up. And the other thing you have to know about Toulouse, he didn't like the other young fawns. He only liked the old fawns. Why? Well, the oldest fawn was named Styx, and I'm telling the story, right? And as long as I tell the story, she left her body, left time and space, right? And she kept her clothes on. She stayed in the story. So I told the story all the way to the van, talked the whole way to the pizza place, told the story all the way through everybody else eating, and all the way home, right? And we had a night out. And that was the beginning of the Toulouse fawn stories. So every night, Grace would say, Dad, would you tell me another story about Toulouse? Sure. Get in bed, and I would tell the stories, right? Well, one time, Toulouse really wanted to meet a human being. So he looked around, he hid behind trees, and he saw this one little girl. And he said, she looked like she was trustworthy and good and cared about the woods. And so he decided he would make friends with her. Now, her name was Grace. And, Dad, that's my name. Weird. Very strange. You're right, same name. Anyway, she was 3 years old. Dad, I'm 3. Very strange. Wow. And so I would tell the stories about Toulouse and Grace and the adventures they would have, right? A couple months go by. Every night she wants these stories, and she says, Dad, can we go up into the mountains to the fawn village? It's like, okay. So we get backpacks, sandwiches, get in the car, drive up to the little, where you can park kind of in the mid part of the mountain there. We live by the Pacific Crest Trail, and we go hiking up into the mountains. And up there, cedar trees and sugar pines and Douglas fir, and there's these large granite boulders kind of placed around the woods. And Grace sees a cluster of these boulders, and she's like, Dad, there it is. That's the fawn village. They make it look like rocks when people are around, and then it becomes their homes at night. Say, okay, well, let's go look around. So we go look around, and she finds these sticks, and she's like, these are the hiking sticks the fawns use, right? And we see this bark on these madrone trees, this thin kind of bark. And she's like, they use this for paper, Dad. And then we see kind of a burned out campfire and Pabst Blue Ribbon cans around. And she's like, Dad, this is what the fawn drinks. Just like you. Right? So we're looking around, and all of a sudden, after she's kind of surveyed the area, she starts calling out. You know, Fawns, Fawns, it's okay, it's Grace. It's Grace, you can come out. Fawns, right? And she looks, and she waits, and she looks around, and there's nothing, right? No sounds, no movement. And she kind of looks a little bit perplexed. We go down the mountain after kind of hiking around the woods, and a couple weeks later, she's like, Dad, can we go back to the fawn village? Yeah. And so we get the backpacks, and this time she's taken half shells from walnuts. She's put little candies and little paper drawings that she's kind of wadded up into these things. And we go up into the fawn village, and she sets the shells outside each, very kind of sanctimoniously outside each of the rocks, right? And she waits, and nothing comes out. And so she starts calling, Fawns, Fawns, it's okay, it's Grace. And there's nothing, right? And I start to get this sad, troubled feeling, right? Because I know what she's feeling. She's feeling like, I know in the stories the fawns only come out to those who are good, and they're not coming out. So I try to change the story. I'm like, Grace, you know, fawns are very nervous, anxious creatures, and sometimes it doesn't matter. Dad, that's not how it is. They come out to those who are good, right? Because she's helped create this world. So every 2 or 3 weeks, we're going up. She's trying more elaborate pictures, more elaborate things. We're calling. The fawns are not coming. 6 months goes by, and Grace says, Dad, I want to go up to the fawn village one more time, but if they don't come out, I don't want to go up there anymore. I don't want to look for them anymore, and I don't want you to tell me the stories anymore. Okay. She draws all these elaborate pictures. She dictates notes that I transcribe for her. She makes the gifts. We go up. She leaves the gifts and the notes before each house. She calls out. She says, Dad, I want you to call for the fawns too. So I'm like, Fawns? Dad, don't pretend to call. Really call. So I'm trying to really call. Fawns, Fawns, you need to come out, right? Nothing. And then she asks me, put me on top of the one boulder. So I hoist her up onto this one rock, and she gets up there and puts her hands over her heart, closes her eyes, and she just starts to sing. Fawns, my name is Grace, and you can trust me. She's making up these words, just is so pure, right? She's almost 4 years old. She's singing this song. And I'm just standing at the bottom of this rock, just my heart breaking, right, for this child who's just yearning in a very pure way to see these magical beings. And she finishes her song, and she opens her eyes and looks around, and there's nothing, right? There's no sound. There's no fawns. So I reach up and I bring her down, and we hold hands, and I want to comfort her. And so I'm telling her, you know, Gracie, we don't really know how these fawns work. And Dad, please don't talk. So just in silence, she's feeling sad and brokenhearted, because this is the end of this world. And I'm feeling sad and brokenhearted. And we're walking down this trail. And this particular day, I took a different trail to take her into a park that I thought might comfort her. And so if you know Ashland, we have a 2-mile park called Lithia Park, and ponds, and there's wooded spaces, and there's open green grass. And we're coming down the trail. We're coming into this park. It takes us about 20 minutes. And we happen to just land in this one area where there's a wide green grass area. And as we come to the edge of the woods and the edge of that grass, there, standing in the middle of the grass, fur legs, matted goatee, horns coming out of the side of his head, playing a wooden flute, is a faun. Now, it was just some guy who had fur pants and had wired deer antlers to his head. He actually had made a mask of oak leaves around his eyes, and he was dancing around playing this wooden flute. Now Grace sees him and says, "There he is." And I think, this guy's on drugs. But I didn't have any choice, right? I have to play this thing through. So, holding hands, we both kind of go out into the grass. This guy sees us, he stops dancing, stops playing, and he just kind of stands there. We get close, and I say, "Mr. Fawn, we have been looking for you for a long time. And this is Grace, and she's a really good person, and she really cares about the woods, and she just wanted to meet you." And this guy, whoever he is, crouches down, and he makes eye contact with Grace, and he says, "Oh, yes, I know Grace is a good person, and I know you care about the woods, and I'd like to meet you too." And he puts his hand out, and Gracie puts her little hand out, and they shake hands. And then I say, "Grace, do you want to say anything?" And she says, "No." And then we both kind of back out. And then the guy says to me, "Hey, a couple times a year I come through here. I usually camp out right over there." And there's a sleeping bag and a backpack kind of underneath some rhododendrons. I said, "Okay, thanks." And then Grace lets go of my hand and just takes off, just running as fast as she can go through the park. And she's yelling, "I saw a fawn, I saw a fawn, I saw a fawn!" And I run to catch up to her, and when I get to her, she says, "Dad, now do you believe? Now do you believe?" Right? And this is what story can do in us, right? Beyond the rational mind, story creates a world and a hope and draws up a longing that causes us to reach into places we thought were impossible, and to yearn for things we didn't think we'd ever see. And then suddenly to find the very thing that we thought was impossible. There are young people right now who feel like there is no hope. And we have to find a way to bring up that compassionate spiritual imagination where we can dream dreams of possibilities. And if we dream those together, they can carry us into what we thought could never happen, right? We have a culture that's telling us stories that are full of fear, full of apocalyptic nightmares. And we tell those stories to us until all of us kind of shut down. But we could find other kinds of stories about generosity, about kindness, about creativity, about possibility that could cause us to yearn into creating a different kind of world that would surprise us in delightful ways, right? So outside the Modern Museum of Art in Denver, they put a shipping container and a little sign that said, Empathy Museum. And inside that container, there were cubbies from floor to ceiling, 3 sides of the walls, and in each cubby, pairs of shoes. And each pair of shoes was worn, and they had sizes, right? Women's 6, and men's 7, this kind of thing. And the curator would say to you, find a pair of shoes you're willing to put on. So you find different sizes that were yours, and choose a pair of shoes, put them on. Then they'd take you outside to the sidewalk, right downtown Denver, and they'd show you, taped on the sidewalk, a series of red arrows. And they'd say, you're invited now to follow these arrows, and walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And then they'd give you a pair of headphones. And you take off in this pair of shoes owned by another human being, and you would hear that person in your headphones telling you their life story, right? Syrian refugee who recently immigrated to the United States, or a cancer survivor, or a single mom working 2 jobs to raise 3 kids, right? And you would hear their story as you're wearing their very shoes. And the curator told me when people came back, they used to give them a 3x5 card. Would you like to write a note to this person? And he said the people would write in tiny writing. They said, can I get another card? Can I get another card? Just wanting to tell that person, I didn't know people in your situation, what you've been through. And this opened my mind. This changed my awareness. This changed my heart towards folks in your situation. Thank you for telling me your story, right? Just this heart connection would happen. Because what that person would be doing was using the very muscles that we used as children, right? They would travel through space and time, leave their bodies, and sit in that story with that person as they walked that mile, and they would see as that person sees, and hear as they hear, and feel and know life, just for that moment in the story, the way they knew life. And there would be a connection and an expansion of their sense of humanity. So I work for this nonprofit called The Hearth, and we've been using this power of story in all kinds of situations to help strengthen, build relationships, strengthen communities, kind of enrich our lives, and sometimes mobilize people for good. Sometimes we work in traumatized communities to foster healing. And in 2017, I was invited to live with my wife and daughter in Austin, Texas, to lead a number of story events in the city there. And as we started to lead these, this was right after Donald Trump was elected president, and there was a lot of really derogatory language that was being used about immigrants. And I had a group of young adults called themselves dreamers. In fact, some of these young adults were the ones who coined that term. Came to me and said, could we do a night where we could share our stories? So I helped them. We organized this event. We actually collected 100 handwritten stories of undocumented people in the city who wrote out their story. This became a gallery that started traveling around into coffee shops and University of Texas and churches and different public spaces. It still travels around to this day. And then we decided to do a live event where some of these young adults would tell their story first person in front of a live audience. It was advertised. We had about 400 people. It was the largest gathering ever at the Mexican American Cultural Center, which is right downtown Austin. And these 6 young adults, I remember meeting with them before they went on, and they were making last final arrangements. You know, as someone from the dominant culture, someone who swims like a fish in this culture, I hadn't even thought of what this was going to be like for them to tell their story, that they were putting their lives at risk. And so they were making last arrangements because they thought this has been so well publicized, it's possible immigration could come and take us away and we could be deported. So they just wanted to make sure everything was in order. And I remember talking to them like, you don't have to do this. And they said, no, we do have to do this. People need to hear our stories. And so the 6 of them got up, and there was a National Public Radio sent their immigration correspondent. We had 3 national newspapers there, and they told their stories in front of this live audience. And one of the storytellers was named Christian Mendoza. His first line of his story was, ever since I was little, I wanted to be a policeman. And he said, the reason I had that dream is my dad, ever since he was little, he wanted to be a policeman. And he told me this. And he and his best friend were planning. They lived in Juarez, Mexico, and they had a plan that if they got older, when they got older and when they became policemen, they would fix all the problems that were happening in their community and make it safe for families. They did get older. They did become policemen. They tried some of those things. They actually became what we would call detectives, and they tried a number of interventions in the community, and it was working, and they were succeeding. And then one night, there was a knock on Christian's parents' door, It was the wife of his dad's best friend. And she said, my husband's body has been found, he's been tortured, he's been murdered, and the two of you need to run. And he said, in that very moment, they didn't take anything with them. They ran to the border and they found a way and they fled the country and they came into the United States for their own safety. But after I was born, my dad would tell me these stories of being a policeman, and it planted the seed, and I wanted to carry forward that dream. So when I was 16 years old, there was an internship program here in the city of Austin with the police department. I applied for it, I got in, I got trained. And in my 16th year, I remember my first time I got to work with the rest of the police force to do a security detail. He said President Bill Clinton came to the city on a book tour, and he came to our primary bookstore. If you know Austin, it's called Book People, right downtown. And he said I was part of the security detail with the other police force. And we had the cords out there to block people off and all these, and I was the guy working the door. So I had to check people's ID and let them in and out of the front door to the bookstore. And he said, I remember when the limousine pulled up and President Clinton came out and he had an assistant with him. The two of them were making their way, and there was all these people there, and they were asking for autographs and calling them over to trying to get pictures, selfies, and this kind of thing. And it took a while for them working through that crowd to finally come up to the door. And when they came up to the door, the assistant to the president said, young man, do you want a photograph? And I said, yeah. I took my phone out and I stood next to the president, and they took my picture. And I did my duty, opened the door and kept the place safe. And that night when I got home, took my phone, downloaded the photograph, printed it off on a printer, went to high school the next day, brought that photograph, and told the folks in my class, or the other students, hey, everybody come around here. Here's a picture of me with President Bill Clinton. And the other students gathered around, and they looked, and then they sort of squinted, and then one of them said, that's Matthew McConaughey. That's not President Clinton. He said, it turned out I didn't know what President Bill Clinton looked like. I also didn't know who Matthew McConaughey was. What I figured out was President Clinton was with Matthew McConaughey, the movie star. Everybody was asking for photographs and autographs of the movie star, so I just assumed that's the president. When they came up to me, it was actually President Bill Clinton who said to me, young man, do you want a photograph? Assuming I wanted a picture with the movie star. And then he took my camera and took the picture, right? About a year and a half later, he said, President Obama comes to the same bookstore. I'm on the security detail. This time I'm working the cars. I'm in charge of guarding the cars with some other police force there and other security. And the event ends. President Obama and his entourage come back to the cars, and he said President Obama actually made eye contact, probably because I was the youngest one there, and said, young man, do you want a picture with all of us? And I said, yes. And so this time I knew what the president looked like. And I stood next to President Obama, and some of his entourage took my phone, and they took a picture of us, right? A few months later, I graduate from high school. I get into a criminology department at the University of Texas, and just after graduation, I'm called into the financial aid office at the university. I sit down, and they say, this Social Security number, it doesn't match you. They said, are you sure you wrote it down? Yeah, that's my number. And they said they run it a few times, and they're like, it doesn't match. So I go home, and I tell my parents, they're having trouble. They say they can't run the financial aid or anything. My Social Security number's not working. And he said my parents just went pale, and then they just kind of started to fall apart in tears. And when they finally kind of pulled themselves together, they said, you were born in Mexico. You were 3 months old when we fled. We bought this number for you, hoping that would never be found out. And so he said, because I didn't have citizenship, I couldn't go to the university, I couldn't get the financial aid I needed, I couldn't work for any law enforcement, not city, not state, not federal. And the dream that I'd had since I was little died. And then his last line in this audience, 400 people there, he says, so I just want to leave you with this. He said, you trust me to guard 2 presidents, but you don't trust me to vote. So the event ends that night, and there's a woman standing in the back. And I'd seen this woman just before we started the event. She was very sharply dressed, red business suit, kind of these cool blue tinted glasses, and this blonde, sharp cut hair. She had this expensive camera equipment. She'd come right up to me before the event and said, introduced herself and said, I'm a professional photographer. I'm here on behalf of some of the newspapers you have here. I'm going to be moving around the room the first 20 minutes, taking a lot of photographs, so don't be alarmed. Just doing my job, and then I'll be out of your hair. Well, the event ends, and people clear out, and this woman, who's quite tall, I saw her standing in the back, and she kind of waits for people to leave, and then she walks up to me, and she says, I have to tell you something. She said, I've been living in a bubble. I didn't know it, but I've been living in a bubble. She goes, I am to the right of any Republican you've ever met. I'm for the wall. I'm for all immigrants, not only not allowed in, but sent out, who are already here. But I never heard their stories until tonight. And I need to change. And she said, I would love to take out to lunch every one of the storytellers tonight, and I want to help Christian get his dream back. And I want to find people that can help him go to college and make this work. Will you set up a meeting for us? Now, if we had a night called Let's Debate Immigration, right? The people, whatever, on one side would show up with their arguments, and the people on the other side would show up with their arguments, and we'd probably each know, when you say this, I'm going to counter with this, right? And nothing would change. But when we move to the level of story, right? Story lives beneath right and wrong. Story lives beneath true and false. Story is the language of human experience. Every time we tell a story from our own lives, what we're saying to one another is, do you feel me? Can you feel me? Right? This is what it's like to be me. And if you're willing to listen, right, without judgment, you get transported, just like when we were children. And you sit in the life of somebody else, and you kind of live with them a little bit. You feel their life, what they see, what they hear, what they feel. And a connection can be made. And even if we still disagree on the issues, we feel their humanity. And it becomes more difficult to denigrate someone else, to stereotype them, to set them aside. It becomes more difficult to not honor their humanity once we've walked with them in their shoes and felt their life. Right? That's this power of story that every human being has access to. We all have lived something worth telling. We all know how to listen. And when we speak in story talk, in story language, we access that deeper capacity we have as human beings. So what I've learned about the way of kind of bringing this into consciousness is that instead of just me up here talking, we need to find a way for all of us, we're going to do a little exercise here for all of us to tell stories as a way to kind of explore this. Now, this is usually the moment where you text your best friend saying, call now. And then you pick it up and oh, sorry, I have a phone call. I have to go now, right? But don't do that. Just stick it out, particularly those who really want to run. Then that means there's something really trying to, you're going to learn here. So stay. And what we're going to do here in a minute is I'm going to invite you to remember some place that you loved when you were little, okay, when you were younger, a place that you loved when you were younger. And if going all the way back to childhood, just like I don't want to go there, then choose another age that feels more comfortable. But find a time when you were young, when you were little, a place you loved. It was your best friend's backyard. They had this wide grass field and a little creek in the back, and you would hang out there all the time. Or it was a little summer cabin that an uncle had that they would loan your family for a week, and you'd go to that cabin by the lake and fish and you loved being there every summer. Some place you loved when you were young. And what will happen is you'll be in these groups, and I want you to get in groups of 3 or 4, but not 5. This is very difficult in every group. Okay, so 3 or 4, because that way there's more time for you to share, okay? So you're going to find 2 or 3 other people. Each of you are going to share a place you loved when you were young, and I want the other people in the group, the ones who are not sharing, to just listen, okay? So don't ask questions, right? And don't comment, right? Like, oh, there's a book, you need to read this book. No comments and no questions. Even if you don't understand where they are, no questions, no comments. And when they're done, just say thank you. Okay, so don't go into conversation. Just say thank you, and then let the next person share. So everybody's made an offering of their particular image from childhood, okay? Okay, so you find 2 or 3 others, groups of 3 and 4. Everybody gets 2 to 3 minutes each to kind of share their space that they loved when they were little. And everybody will say thank you, and then we'll come back, okay? You can arrange yourselves however. Everybody go around here? You guys want to go around? Everybody share? One more, okay. A couple more minutes, just a couple more minutes. We have a couple groups just finishing up. Okay, so we'll kind of come back together. I forgot to tell you, you can talk after everyone has shared. Some of you are taking a vow of silence. Standing, staring, we don't want to break the rules. Yeah. And you can stay where you are in your particular area. Yeah. So what was it like to remember and share your experience?
Peaceful.
It's kind of peaceful. Very easy. Peaceful because the experience itself was kind of had a sense of peace to it?
Going back to a place that it's peaceful because of joy and experience.
Yeah. So you go back and you remember it, and as you're telling it, you start bringing in the emotions of that experience, and it kind of gives you a sense of peace. Yeah, just to remember it. Okay. Others, what was it like to remember and share for you?
It was very warm because it also brought in the love of the people who lived in that home. Their love in my life and how they loved me. This is my grandparents.
Yeah, so you start to talk about a place, and then all of a sudden you remember the relationships that were connected, and these vectors go out, and you start remembering all these other things about that. And there's a warmth that's there, right? So stories, one of the things stories is a way we transfer emotion. Stories is an emotional communication. And we feel that first before we're even telling others. Yeah, that warmth. Others, what was it like to remember and share?
Feel vulnerable because you're telling a story that you feel is yours and you don't want, like, you kind of want to be like, well, are you gonna, it's like you're giving a toy. Are you going to play nicely with this?
Yeah, are you going to play nicely with this?
Take care of this story.
Yeah.
Because it's something that's, like you said, intimate.
It's intimate, and you feel a vulnerability,
Yes.
And so like what you were saying there, what I noticed, and you can check me on this, is you're kind of testing these listeners. Like, are they going to play nicely? Are you guys, can I trust you as I'm going to tell this? And if they look trustworthy, and if they look present, right, they're not looking at their phones, they're not kind of looking around, then you decide, okay, I'll trust you, and I'll share you with this little precious moment of when I was little in this place that I loved, right? And if the listening's not there, then you just think, I'll just do what I have to do to get through this exercise, but I'm not going to really go there, right? So you feel the relational nature of the listening and the telling, right? And what you might notice is the most important thing in storytelling is actually the listening. If the listening is not there, then the teller's story dies. So we need good listening in order for the story to be there. Otherwise, we take it and say, no, I'm keeping it here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Others, what was it like to listen, to be a listener to others?
When our group was sharing, we followed the rules.
You followed the rules.
Thank you. But afterwards, when we were talking, we found that there had been connections made.
Lots of connections.
That hearing somebody's story brought out a similar experience, a shared experience.
Yeah. So very different lives, different backgrounds or whatever, but you're telling these human experiences, and then you started noticing, oh my gosh, we have so many similarities despite the differences, right? Yeah, you feel that commonality when we get down to that layer of human experience. Mm-hmm. Others, what was it like for you to listen?
I'm super visual, and so I just saw it and felt like I felt it. Like when you were telling the story of your daughter, I like the same thing, like the feel of the coats.
Yeah.
So I'm there.
You're there. Yeah, and so one of the things about storytelling is it's full body meaning making, and good stories engage the senses, right? So and our bodies want to participate, right? So if you were in your story group and you said, you know, it's interesting kind of excavating early human experiences because there's a number of regions that I would call special, which is an interesting word actually when you think about it, because special highlights a certain height. You understand? See that? Hear the language I'm talking about? Like my body is complete. I'm only talking to your intellect. I'm talking in abstractions. But as soon as you say, there was a little creek, and there were crawdads in the creek, and it was muddy, and you had to take off your shoes because your feet would sink down into the ankles. You know, you start to see it, feel it, you know, smell it. Your senses get awake. So good storytelling involves the body, and the body wants to be engaged. And when the body is engaged, it becomes a shared experience in a certain way. So that when neuroscientists take those little things they put on our brains, you know, when they're studying us, the wires and the little pads, what they'll notice is when people sit in a group, their brains have very different patterns going on. And then someone starts to tell a story. And if the story is told well, all of a sudden those brain patterns go in sync, right? So that when you get tears, I get tears. Or when you get surprised by something you remembered, I feel that surprise. Or you're tense, you know, I feel that tension, right? So it's what they call transportation, is what neuroscientists call it, narrative transportation. We're transported through time and space, and now we're sitting in that little experience with the other person. And what allows us to do that is using language that involves the body. What did you see? What did you hear? What did it smell like? What did the food taste like? If you engage the body, then our imagination can build it and kind of go there with you. Okay, let's try another question, because some of you just had a bad group, and you're too nice to say anything about it. So we'll just make everybody switch and change groups. We'll try another question so you can have a better experience. So I want you to think of a time you got in trouble. Sometime you got in trouble when you were younger. Okay? Okay? Now, not that one that you're thinking. That's a little too much. The other one. So think of a time you got in trouble when you were younger, and you're in charge of your sharing. Now, maybe it was a time you got caught. You got in trouble, you got caught. Maybe you didn't get caught. You should have been caught, but you didn't. You got away with it. Or maybe, you know, it was a time you were troubled, like you were in love with somebody, and it was just causing all this turmoil, and you didn't know what to do with that, or some other issue was going on. You wanted to do something that your parents didn't want. You wanted to start a career they didn't like, and there was a troubled kind of sense of it. So whatever question works for you, a time you were in trouble when you were younger. And we're going to have everybody stand up, find different groups, 2 or 3 people, so you're a group of 4. Same rules, no questions, no comments. Just say thank you at the end. Share.
I'm just going to shift.
Okay, I think we're ready to come back. Everybody get a chance to share? You can stay where you are. We're gonna move one more time. Okay. So, what was it like to remember and share these experiences? What was it like to remember and share these experiences? A little more difficult. Okay, for some, yeah.
The horror was visceral.
The horror was visceral. You could feel it. Oh, okay. Yes. You see that full body meaning making, like it comes into your body. All that memory is still there of the tension or whatever it was. Yeah. Okay. Others, what? Yeah.
I was surprised that the emotion was still there.
Surprised that the emotion was still there. Yeah.
Way back.
Yeah. And what they find out is that, our brains cannot tell the difference between what's imagined and what's real. So as soon as you start to bring those images back, your nervous system responds like, we're going to get busted. Why did we take the car? Or whatever it is. And all the emotion's still there. Yeah. Others, yeah.
It's unresolved story.
It's kind of an unresolved story.
Yeah, it's still in process.
Yeah, still in process. Yeah, the story's not done yet in some ways. Interesting, yeah. What was it like to listen to others? It's kind of fun to kind of sit in their life and kind of go through it, knowing you're safe the whole time.
I rode in a Model T.
You got to ride in Model T, and you were saying you felt a lot of empathy. Yeah, so story it's a way we work those compassion muscles, those empathy muscles, because we're feeling what others felt, right? So when you're compassionate, you're moved by the suffering or the joy of another person, and your system is kind of moved by that, and you expand that joy, or you help carry that pain or the tension. It's a way we kind of come together and connect. So you feel empathy. Yeah.
Well, along with that empathy, there's, I know you, like connection.
I know you.
I know you now because
Yeah.
I have a story of like, I have that feeling too. So there's now closeness.
There's a closeness, even with people you didn't really maybe know before you came in here. Right, so if I had you in groups saying, okay, we'll talk about how long you've lived here in Nampa and what you do and all this kind of stuff, that would be information and data. But when you tell me something you've lived through, I kind of get a sense of your vitality, the particular way you're in the world. I get a feel for you. It's like my friend who always says, like, can you feel me? Can you feel me? And you get a feeling for them. And there's a connection sometimes that's made, right? That's a little deeper than just exchanging information. Yeah.
The stories were different, but a lot of the emotions were the same.
The stories. Oh, in each of your group, you told different facts.
They're different stories, different settings, different things, but some of the emotional and
Dynamics.
Are very similar.
Very similar. Right, so again, you feel that human connection, like we're not that as far apart as our culture tells us we are, right? So if I was to tell you, for example, that Megan and I made sure that your political enemies were in your groups so far today. The people who believe the exact opposite of you politically, you would say, well, I kind of liked the people in my group, And so I'm going to have a hard time, stereotyping them now, right? Because you feel the dynamics and the emotions were similar. I feel the humanity of those people, and it's difficult to put them back into a box. Yeah.
We can all be a little bit impish.
We can all be a little bit impish. Yeah, you noticed in the stories. Yes, we all of us have that capacity. Mm-hmm. So you feel that. Yeah, and sometimes it's kind of a relief. Like I did this. I don't know where we were, but a few events back, and I had children and teenagers with adults, and they all mixed up, and they were like, a lot of adults are bad. One little girl said, and I was like, well, how does that feel? She goes, relieved. Because of who she was, right? And it is kind of a relief. We think we're the only one who's lonely or anxious or has done bad things or whatever it is. And then we realize, oh, okay, I'm just I'm a human being like everybody else. Okay, what a relief. Yeah. Others, what did you notice in this kind of sharing? Yeah.
Well, I just have to say my sister and I are here tonight together, and this is really great. I'm enjoying it. We had picked the same subject memory of a cabin when we were children.
So you told the same, even though you were in different groups.
Totally different stories and memories, which was kind of
Right. And she was the one who actually got you in trouble. You were perfectly good, right? It was her fault.
Do you have an hour up your class?
Yeah. We'll take your confession later. Yeah. Okay. What's it like to talk to other people like this instead of the normal ways we talk to one another? Feels safer. Yeah. Maybe to have those rules around the listening, that no one's going to try to fix you or take the spotlight. Feels a little safer.
They feel like friends.
You feel like friends.
I've just met all the people that I've been with, and I walk away feeling like friends.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
This is so nice.
I get you. Yeah.
And now when Mary talks about her sister, I met her.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. You kind of know her a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's try one last one. We're going to switch one last time, and I want you to think of a time that someone was kind to you. A time you experienced or received kindness, or maybe compassion even. Like maybe it was small. You knocked something over in a grocery store, and somebody ran over and said, "Hey, don't worry about it. I'll pick it up for you." Or they heard there'd been a loss in the family and they brought a meal by, just a neighbor just left it on your doorstep or something like that. Or maybe it was a little larger. Maybe you were young, you were 18, didn't know what you were going to do, and a teacher or some relative could tell you were struggling, said, "Hey, let's take a walk," or, "What's going on?" And they really listened and were present to you. Sometime you experienced kindness or maybe even compassion, where somebody was really feeling what you were feeling and felt for you. Okay? And so we'll get up, we'll find other groups, 2 or 3, different group, same rules, share a moment of kindness or compassion.
visit you guys and they were all coming. And I'm not much of a good start with, and I hadn't really thought about it. And we're already in a days. And friends just literally showed up with, and I said, some of the kids are vegetarian, and Mark, you know, I can't really cook this right now. And they brought a veggie chili and a pot of not veggie chili, and other neighbors
Okay, everyone, we're going to gather back together here. So you can kind of stay where you are if you need to. What was it like to remember and share these experiences? What's it like to remember and share these moments? It's a little overwhelming. Yeah, it's sometimes a lot of emotion there. You know.
The honesty that came out.
Yeah, there was an honesty. What was it like to hear that kind of honesty?
It was heartwarming to know that people trusted me enough to tell me their story.
Yeah, it's heartwarming. You feel that you're being trusted with something special, and it's what's happening here, or can be happening in our groups, is a sacred exchange of gifts. So some of us, we sit there, we offer our presence. Like, here I am, no other distractions. I'm just going to listen to you. I'm going to be here, fully present, as best I can. And that's a gift. And then the other person says, okay, well, here's this little treasured part of my life. And they offer that to us. And it's an act of hospitality, actually. Like, I'm inviting you to come and share this experience with me. And in that exchange of presence and telling, of listening and telling, that's where that connection makes. That's where that trust is felt in that human connection. Yeah. Others, what did you notice in this particular sharing? Yeah.
For the third time, I felt, the vulnerability or the risk-taking was definitely deeper, and I'm sure you designed that, maybe?
Yeah.
Diabolically. No, but it's structured well, right? Because we were practicing it, and you were saying we were practicing our compassion and empathy muscles, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, third time.
Third time, you could feel the vulnerability, you could feel the sharing.
I even felt like I felt more, like I could say stuff that I wouldn't have said in my first group.
Yeah, so you felt your own heart a little more open than the first group. Yeah, and willing to kind of go there. Yeah, so we're practicing this. We're testing the trust, how trustworthy the groups are. So if you've had good groups, when you got to the end, it's like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share this. Yeah.
It took me 3 people to find something to say. And I know I've had acts of kindness. So to me, then that tells me how unaware that I am, that I'm the recipient of them. And that perhaps in the future I'll be, because of this, I'll be more cognizant of when they happen to me.
Huh. So just noticing, it took 3 people listening to the different sharing you're saying in your group.
Yes.
It kind of warmed that up, and then it helped you to become aware. And so going forward, just like, I want to notice this in the moment. I want to receive this a little bit deeper after sharing with this group. Yeah. Yeah. Because in story, we kind of come in touch with some deeper realities and maybe our values and what matters to us. We tell stories that carry our values. And when we hear our values told, or when we live through them in the experiences of others, it rings within us and it wakes that part of us up. Yeah. Others, what did you notice in this kind of sharing? Yeah.
A little anonymity when you're telling stories with people that you don't know well. I told things in this group that I wouldn't have told if there were some other people.
That are in this room right now. Right? Yeah. Right.
Censor what I say.
Yeah. Yeah. And
But
so
if it's people who are relative strangers, there's a safety. You can allow me maybe be a little bit more honest.
yeah, safety and strangers. Yeah.
It's like my mom, when she flies now, she's like, Megan, nobody talks on the plane. We used to tell each other everything.
Nobody talks on the plane. Yeah.
Because we never were going to see each other again.
Right. We're never going to see each other again. So it's like, thank God. Okay. There's a lot of stuff I need to unload here. I've been waiting to get on this flight. Number 1, I stole when I was younger. Yeah, whatever it was. Yes. Confessional.
I think it was interesting too that we had 3 different groups of different people, and we were building up to a harder conversation, but these are still 3 strangers to me, and we were able to have that conversation.
Yeah. So even though it was 3 different groups and these are still strangers, you still found yourself.
It built it up for us.
Yeah, so what I'm learning is that every human being, we all have hearts that want to connect. We want to be seen. We want to connect no matter what generation we're from. And so what we're all longing for is a good question and a listening ear. And it's a gift when someone asks you, what was your favorite hiding place? Or did you ever have an animal you really loved? And you get to pull from the attic that treasured experience, particularly if the person's like, I really want to hear. I'm really interested. So one of the gifts we can offer in the world is to find good questions to ask and then to have that same kind of listening presence. So when you're with your family or in the workspace or in the public square, ask story-based questions, not information-based questions. So ask questions that are like, when was a moment? Tell me an experience of, did you ever encounter? Do you remember when? Tell me a story about. Questions that ask for experiences, not ideas or information.
That's so interesting as you say that, because I think of when we are put together one-on-one in a conference or whatever, ice-breaking, it's all about the detail stuff.
It's all about the details.
Like you talked about. This, I don't need to be taking notes.
Right.
I'm feeling their words and behind their words.
Yeah.
And the other, I have to write it down because I have to report on you to the group leader to tell what you did.
Yeah.
Most uncomfortable thing in the world. This is so comfortable.
Yeah, and when we get,
Remember the little stories.
and you'll remember these moments too. Yeah. So when you get in groups where there's some contention, if you ask for the story-based questions, you can feel each other. Tell me a meal that mattered to you. A memorable meal you had. Oh gosh, I remember we were traveling through Poland. I was on this work event and we broke down the snow and these strangers took us. And you remember these moments that helps you feel each other's lives. Yeah. Yes.
So I was waiting for your third question, thought, okay, this will be a more difficult one, I'm sure, because you were working up to this. And then you said, a moment someone was kind. And I thought, oh, that's nice and lighthearted. That's an easy thing to talk about. That'll be cheerful. But the things that mean a lot to us are the kindnesses when we were in a difficult place. And so even though the topic was something good, cheerful, that it also revealed that as well.
Yeah, the person was acting kind, but often that was because we were in a place where we needed a kindness or we needed the compassion. So, yes, and again, like you probably noticed yourself, well, how far am I going to go with this? Can I trust these people? Will I just kind of stay on the surface? And this is this trust that we're kind of practicing here. And we're practicing telling stories, which I hope you noticed. You all know how to tell stories. Everybody knows how to tell stories. But we're also practicing listening. And listening is, we just need more of this in the world, of this kind of presence to one another. Mary Oliver says the first act of love is attention. And we give each other attention. It is an act of love. Yeah. So I just want to end with this image, and then I'll hang around to, if people want to, because I know you all want to buy a book, and we all want to support the local bookstore, so I'll hang around for that. Well, you guys know this, right? We're on this. You consider yourself the West, yes. And so in Oregon, like here, I suppose, we're living with fires now. And so, usually around July, you'll see, if I go to a friend's house, it's not unusual to see bags packed by the front door. Because we live in these little wooded valleys, in a lot of places in Oregon. So when the fires come, they come quick. And in 2020, we had fires that went up all the river valleys, basically. Every river valley in the fall of 2020 had a fire in the state of Oregon. We had fires in our town, 3,500 homes destroyed, over 5,000 people, it's estimated, displaced, right? And it all happened like that, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, And so you just run. And this was 2020, right? So the coronavirus, we couldn't all come together to help each other in that time. This was before vaccines. And so in the spring of 2021, kids finally got to come back to school. And particularly young people, where they're working those social muscles and they haven't been allowed to, and they're in school for the first time. And there was a brand new school in Phoenix and Talent, two little towns just north of Ashland that really faced the brunt of those fires in 2020. So a third of the students who came back to the high school had lost their homes. So they were in FEMA trailers, they were living with other families and friends, they were living in motels, and they had just gone through the trauma of the virus plus the fires, right? So they brought in therapists. The state and the school district brought in therapists, and they set them up in cubbies in the gymnasium and the cafeteria and the hallways. And they told students, you can go see a therapist anytime you want, right? And the therapist, and I saw them there, and they were so sweet, and we need therapists, and thank God for people with that calling. But they sat in the cubbies with, with tissue boxes and stuffed animals and scarves on, and kids were like, I'm never going in there, I'm everything inside me is going to come out, and I'm terrified. So it didn't really work. So the school knew that we were using story as a way of connecting people. They said, would you guys give it a try? And so the state health department sponsored us. We trained a group of adults kind of this size in compassionate listening. We taught them different questions to ask. We went into the classes, and we would, just kind of like here, we'd put kids in small groups. Now, everybody had masks. They were 6 feet apart. This is spring of 2021. And we'd say, okay, do you ever have a weird encounter with an animal or a memorable encounter with an animal? We put them in groups, and they'd say, we had a squirrel that was in our house all night. And kids would all listen, what do you mean? We had a 3-legged dog that knew how to count, and they would tell these stories. And they would be in these circles, right? And they're laughing, they're telling each other, and what's it like telling stories? We never get to talk about our lives. I remember the students say, they never ask us to talk about our lives. We talk about books and math and science. We never talk about what we're going to. And, I remember some kids saying, I've been going to school with, Laura and Diane here for 10 years. I didn't know any of this stuff about their lives, right? So they started looking forward to it. I remember I had one kid saying, I only came to school today to do this story group, And they would get in the circles. And every day we had them do this in all the different classes. And there was an energy there. We did it with the faculty too, and the faculty would cry together because they had never told stories about what the fires had been like for them, and we got into different stories. End of the week, we finally kind of asked the kids, so we've been telling these kinds of stories. What about a time of struggle? As you look over this last year, we've had fires, and we've had the virus, and racial awareness of the racial injustices of our country. What's a day or a moment where you were struggling? And would you be willing to tell that in your group? Put them in groups of 6, and they scooted in closer despite the rules. Their voices got quieter, and the tones got lower, and they made eye contact with one another. You just felt the stillness and a kind of a sacredness in the room as they told these moments of struggle. And in one class in particular, I remember they finished their stories, and I said, okay, kind of like we did here, what did you notice? What was it like to tell those stories? And one guy, big guy, broad-shouldered, 6'2", wild, black hair, man, that was joyful. And I said, okay, joyful. Why was it joyful? And he said, well, every story in my group was depressing, but I saw myself in every story, and that was joyful. Yeah. We can weather almost anything if we do it together, if we see each other in the experience, if we know we're not alone, we can go through things. And in this time of divisiveness, and in this time of contention and polarization, if we can learn to feel one another's lives and to share at the level of experience, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. Amen?
Amen.
Thank you for your trust. Thank you for being part of this and trusting me today. Thank you.